He's joining us now, the co-chairman of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota at Duluth, James Fetzer. Professor, thank you so much for being here with us. First of all, is this a required course? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it a required course?
Well, you got your facts foxed, I'm sorry to say. In fact, I created an organization of faculty and experts to study 9/11, not to teach in courses.
Right.
But I must tell you what we have discovered.
Well, I just want to be clear, because
certainly qualify as material for an important course.
So you're saying you're not teaching
this?
I want to be clear here. You're not teaching a course in this.
No, you're confused, and I hope that Fox usually does a better job on their research than this.
All right, so
I created an organization of faculty and scholars to study 9/11.
All right, I want to be clear on this.
We've discovered that practically everything the government has told us about it is false.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a moment. I just want to be clear. So as far as you know, there is no course on 9/11 conspiracy theories being taught at your university or any place else that you know of?
That's right, but it's a great idea. I would certainly support having such a course because there's a lot of material to work with.
All right, and what evidence do you have that the government was involved, that Cheney knew, that anybody in the chain of command knew ahead of time that this was going to happen on 9/11? Can you give us any piece of evidence that would substantiate that argument?
Absolutely. For example, Norman Mineta testified to the 9/11 Commission that he observed Dick Cheney in an underground bunker when a young aide came up to him and repeatedly told him, "Sir, it's 50 miles out. Sir, it's 30 miles. Sir, it's 10 miles out. Sir, do the orders still stand?" Cheney turned around, jumped on him, nearly bit off his head and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything different?" The order had to be to not shoot down the plane that was approaching the Pentagon. After all, the order should have been to shoot it down. Shooting it down would be the obvious thing to do when you consider that you're going to lose the passengers in the plane if you shoot it down, but if you don't, you're going to use the passengers in the plane and also, of course, all the personnel and property at the target.
Hey, Prof, let me ask you, how big is this group of professors that you've put together, that this organization you've formed, that gives credence, if you will, to the theory you just advanced about 9/11?
Well, there are over 300 members, Colonel North, including about 200 with advanced research skills, and about 85 that have affiliations, including physicists, mechanical engineers, pilots, aeronautical engineers.
Sure.
We've discovered that the Twin Towers were brought down by controlled demolition. We've discovered that the Osama bin Laden appears to have had nothing to do with
Prof,
it.
help me out here. Having been involved in a couple of controversial undertakings over my years in government service, how many people in the government were part of this conspiracy that you envision? Hundreds, thousands?
No, Ollie. I think it's a small number. You know about classified, controlled operations where everything's compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Do you know, Ollie, that the FBI has confirmed that they have no hard evidence relating Osama bin Laden to the events of 9/11? Are you aware of that?
Well, Osama bin Laden himself claims that. I mean, they didn't manufacture those tapes.
This is the FBI, Ollie. This is the FBI that has affirmed in the last couple of weeks they have no hard evidence tying Osama bin Laden to 9/11.
And so all of these people that died on 9/11 were, as you're articulating, died as a consequence of what our government did.
We're trying to find out exactly what happened. Our government has a considerable reputation for telling things that are not true,
All right,
Ollie.
Professor, we thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Thursday night, I was invited on to Hannity and Combs, ostensibly to discuss the results of investigations conducted by Scholars for 9/11 Truth. When I got on the show, however, I discovered that instead of wanting to address the rather crucial results, such as we have been discussing here, including that we had established that the Twin Towers were brought down by controlled demolition, which I said, including that we had Norman Mineta's testimony that Dick Cheney had given a stand-down order not to shoot the plane approaching the Pentagon, which we had, including that the FBI in recent weeks had affirmed it has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11, which I said. They were more interested in whether I had discussed any of these questions with my students than whether what I was telling them was true.
And the first time I saw Building 7 come down, straight and fast, I realized this is very curious. I hadn't seen it until just about, it's been about a year and a half now. ago, and as soon as I saw it, in a sense I was hooked. I figured, as a scientist, I can't just ignore this data. I could see that building come straight down. I'd seen demolitions before, controlled demolitions. They look just like that. A kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed. Yeah. And pretty quick, I'm learning about molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet, and yet it comes down, and then it's got this molten metal underneath. And where'd that come from? I have a sample of this molten metal. Previously, molten metal here. Just a tiny sample. This is really all we need. I brought along with me at the last minute. I thought, well, I'll throw that in. And by analyzing this, we determined it is not molten aluminum from the plane. Okay. Indeed, it contains a great deal of iron, which is the product of the thermite reaction. Now, thermite can be purchased on eBay, and many people, I show it in my class, physics, and I'll be showing it this fall in my physical science class. It's commonly shown. It's a very brilliant reaction. You get this white flare, this white dust, which is aluminum oxide coming off, and then this yellow hot molten metal, just white yellow hot, flowing out of this reaction. Now this thermite is so hot, this molten iron, especially when you mix sulfur in, now it's called thermate, it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. And we also see this molten, yellow hot molten metal with white wispy ash pouring out of the South Tower just minutes before its collapse. And I've shown this video, and it's just amazing. The photographs of that, it's in the NIST report, and the evidence is just piling up. This is, it has the characteristics, not of molten aluminum and not of molten, it's not just structural steel that somehow melted, no. It's very little chromium. But it does have sulfur and manganese and some other elements that are characteristic, you see. It's like a fingerprint that the criminal left behind. This carries with it evidence. How was this done? What was used? This chain of events leads me to reluctantly conclude that indeed there does seem to be insider. In other words, not just the hijacked planes, but also others involved setting these thermite cutter charges in the World Trade Center to bring them down. This, again, leads to the conclusion that our Constitution, which is our heritage as Americans, I love my country, I love the Constitution and the people in America. I'm afraid that our Constitution is literally hanging by a thread at this stage.
Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. It is unprecedented that I would get email about a For the Record program before the program even aired. But that was the case in the 24 hours before we taped this show Friday afternoon, as I received several emails of both support and outrage from people who had simply heard Kevin Barrett was to be my guest. Such is the passion generated by Mr. Barrett's views on the events of September 11th, 2001. The most recent event of which I am aware is the resolution signed by 61 state legislators calling for the UW to fire Mr. Barrett. Kevin Barrett is my guest this morning. Mr. Barrett, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, it's good to be with you, Neil.
My question is, shouldn't it be simple enough to provide the evidence that would support the claims of the government? I mean, there should be plenty of physical evidence, shouldn't there?
Well, it depends which claims you're talking about. Personally, I think that the real core of the whole 9/11 question is the issue of whether the 3 World Trade Center buildings were demolished with explosives or whether they fell down for some other reason, such as being damaged by plane crashes or fires. And I think that at this point, the evidence is in. Anybody who's kept up with the critique of the official story in this area knows that at this point, the evidence just, is very convincing that all 3 buildings were taken down with explosives and controlled demolitions. For the government to try to disprove that at this point, or to try to support its case, I think would be very difficult because, they hid all the evidence. They prevented any kind of forensic investigation. All the steel was shipped off as fast as possible to China and melted down for scrap, so it was impossible to test the steel for signs of explosives. Fortunately, some remains, and Professor Stephen Jones has gotten his hands on multiple sources worth of steel, and he's run tests and he's found traces of thermate, an enhanced version of thermite, which is an explosive device that can take out steel, cut right through it like a knife through butter. I think that at this point, no rational person who looks at the evidence can argue against the proposition that the 3 World Trade Center buildings, the Twin Towers and WTC-7 especially, were taken down in controlled demolitions. That, I think, is by now proven beyond a reasonable doubt, as David Griffin has said, and as everybody who's looked into it, I think, from a fair-minded perspective, agrees.
Are you worried that you're shortchanging your own career, that that you will have difficulty pursuing your chosen field by virtue of the controversy?
You know, I think what I'm doing is angling on the long term. In the short term, I may have some problems. It might be a little harder to get rehired next semester. Maybe not, though. I think a lot sooner than most people realize, 9/11 is going to blow wide open.